If you live in the United States like I do, you've probably heard the phrase
Christian nationalism.
Christian nationalism.
Christian nationalists.
Christian nationalism. We should be Christian nationalists. We've got to talk about Christian nationalism.
Now, although Christian nationalism has Christian in its name, is it even Christian? Okay, so what actually is Christian nationalism? Laura Barone Lopez, a PBS journalist back in 2022, explained it this way.
That's a belief that America was founded by and for white Christians, and that the government should center its policies on those religious beliefs.
Dr. Andrew Whitehead and Dr. Samuel Perry write in their book that Christian nationalism describes an ideology that idealizes and advocates a fusion of American civic life with a particular type of Christian identity and culture. This includes symbolic boundaries that conceptually blur and conflate religious identity with race, usually white, where someone was born, usually in the United States, their American citizenship, and their political ideology, which is usually socially and fiscally conservative. Notice that Christian nationalism is a belief that the United States was founded by and for white Christians. This is why recently Christian nationalism is specifically being explained as white Christian nationalism. Jamar Tisby writes, "The concept of white Christian nationalism encompasses the many ways bigotry, prejudice, xenophobia, patriarchy, and racism show up in Christian guise." And so Christian nationalism privileges Christian American over others they deem as non-Christian or un-American, both inside the country and outside the country. And Christian American becomes synonymous with white American, and thus people of color, even when Christian and American, are seen as unchristian and un-American. Yeah, I'm going to pass on that. Now, those who argue in favor of Christian nationalism will say that this explanation is a mischaracterization of Christian nationalism, and Christian nationalism is something different. And so, before moving on, I'll let one author who wrote a book in favor of Christian nationalism explain Christian nationalism in their own terms. This author says, "Christian nationalism refers to a self-conscious Christian nation, a people group saying we are Christian, and then acting in light of that, meaning we're a Christian, so we're going to act for our good." Now, on the surface, this statement makes sense, right? Government should probably act for the best interest of their own people, and Christians should be trying to bring about good for people. However, if you ponder this statement just a little bit more, it reveals a deep problem. We're Christian, so we're going to act for our good. This specification is what reveals how deeply theologically problematic this ideology is, because it overlooks some foundational concepts in the Christian Bible's theology. Christianity is not supposed to be a religion that brings about good news for one nation, but actually Christianity is supposed to bring good news to all nations. From the beginning of God's story, God's promises have been for the benefit of all people and all nations. In Genesis, God makes a covenant with Abraham, and it is expressed repeatedly to Abraham and his descendants. For example, in Genesis 22:18 it says, "And by your offspring all nations of the earth shall be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice." So Abraham and his descendants have a global impact, and that leads to all nations of the world being blessed by his descendants. This theological vision is continued and reiterated multiple times throughout the Hebrew Bible. In Psalm 86:9, for example, it says, "All nations you have made shall come and worship before you, O Lord." These texts in the Hebrew Bible become foundational to early Christian theology, and the promise to all nations becomes reinterpreted in the New Testament in light of Jesus. However, the promises to all nations that's repeatedly mentioned in the Hebrew Bible gets muddled by our modern English translations of the Greek New Testament. The words translated all nations in the Hebrew Bible are kol ha-goyim. When this was translated into the Greek Septuagint, it was translated panta ta ethne. However, when these Greek words are used in the Greek New Testaments, they sometimes get translated all the Gentiles instead of all the nations. So interpreters overlook the obvious connection to the Abrahamic covenant to be a blessing to all nations, simply because it's translated all the Gentiles instead of all the nations. So over and over again, nations are mentioned in the New Testament, but we miss it because it's translated Gentiles. For example, when Paul argues that God's promise to Abraham was the beginning of the gospel to the Gentiles, he cites Genesis 22:18 and the scripture, foreseeing that God would justify the nations by faith, declared the gospel beforehand to Abraham, saying, "All the nations shall be blessed in you." And so Paul understood the gospel as the fulfillment of the Abrahamic promises to be a blessing to all nations. This is why Mark's gospel says the good news must be preached to all nations. The gospel authors and Paul and other early Christian interpreters understood that the gospel was supposed to be good news for all people and all nations. And so the reason the message of Jesus was brought to Gentiles was because early Christian interpreters understood that the gospel was supposed to be for all nations, which obviously include Gentiles. And so Christianity exists today because Second Temple Jewish Jesus followers went out to all the nations. This is why John Goldingay writes in Biblical Theology, the God of the Christian Scriptures, God is thus concerned for all nations. Christian nationalism claims that Christians should work for their own nation's good. Yet this is contrary to the foundational promises of God and the gospel of Jesus that should be brought to all nations. Therefore, Christian nationalism is contradictory to the gospel and is thus not Christian. Christians are supposed to bring the good news of Jesus to all people and all nations. And by doing that, the whole world is supposed to receive the blessings and restoration and salvation and renewal that God wants to bring in this world. And so the gospel of Jesus is definitely political, but it's not the kind of politics that Christian nationalism is all about. And so why does this even matter? Why is Christian nationalism worth talking about? Yeah, why does this matter? Well, Dr. Philip Gorski and Dr. Samuel Perry noticed that as people begin to believe Christian nationalism, the more authoritarianism rises and the threat of violence rises. They write, the more that white Americans seek to institutionalize Christian values or the nation's Christian identity, the more strongly they support gun-toting good guys taking on real or imagined gun-toting bad guys. The more frequent use of the death penalty, any means necessary policing, and even torture as an interrogation technique. In fact, here's the data from their survey that shows the more someone identifies with Christian nationalism, the more likely they are to think that violence should be allowed. Now let me remind you that peace is fundamental to the gospel. In Acts chapter 10, when Peter summarizes the gospel in his sermon, he says the gospel is about peace. You know the message he sent to the people of Israel, proclaiming the good news of peace through Jesus Christ. He is Lord of all. And yet Christian nationalism leads to threats of violence and acts of violence, all in the name of national identity and claiming to be Christian. Amanda Tyler, the executive director of the Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty and the lead organizer of the Christians Against Christian Nationalism campaign, insightfully explains the dangers of Christian nationalism.
And importantly to me and to thousands of other Christians, it distorts Christianity, sometimes beyond recognition. And that's because it takes Christianity's central message, which is a gospel of love, and turns it into a false idol of power. It confuses our allegiances to God and replaces it with an ultimate allegiance to country. They have totally replaced their allegiance to God with an allegiance to political power. And when we do that, then we lose our commitment to being peacemakers and we become violent.
Now, the chaos and violence of Christian nationalism isn't limited to the January 6th insurrection. There are also violent extremists that have been deeply entrenched in Christian nationalism.
Well, one very specific instance is an anniversary that we tragically mark today. 7 years ago today, 9 Black worshipers were murdered in the Mother Emanuel AME Church. This is a tragic example of how Christian nationalism in the hands of a violent extremist can turn deadly. We saw that again at the Tree of Life Synagogue outside of Pittsburgh, and of course we saw it on January 6th itself. Christian nationalism feeds white supremacy, it feeds anti-Semitism, it feeds anti-Muslim sentiment, and all of these factors threaten the religious freedom of our neighbors.
Now, obviously, every person who embraces Christian nationalism isn't going to be a violent extremist or an insurrectionist, but Amanda Tyler points out these examples to show that Christian nationalism has real consequences. It lends support to white supremacy, anti-Semitism, violent extremism, authoritarian violence, and there are numerous examples of Christian nationalism leading to violence and chaos. And so if you think that Christian nationalism is a danger and distortion of Christianity, hit the like button below. And visit Christians Against Christian Nationalism's website in the video description below to learn more about what they do and sign their statements. If you want to learn more about this topic, I would really recommend The Flag and the Cross and Taking America Back for God. The work of each of these scholars is very timely and important, and they also have numerous lectures on YouTube you can also check out. There's no way I can fit everything in this video, so if you want more information on this topic, consider coming over to Bible Geek's Patreon community. For a couple dollars a month, you can help me to continue to bring biblical and theological education to the masses that is easily accessible and free. There are multiple tier options that include things like my full video transcripts with full footnotes and all my references. There's actually an extended uncut version of this script, so you can dive deeper into this topic if you want to. So head over to my Patreon and consider becoming a patron. Another way to support the channel is to subscribe to the channel and watch this next video. I am so close to 1,000 subscribers and 4,000 watch hours, so every view and every subscription really helps out a lot. A special thanks to my patrons for supporting this channel. Your support means the world to me. Until next time, peace.